Okay guys, so I'm just here is our video tutorial on the harping tradition. Now just I want to speak very quickly here. This is quite a big topic. These tutorials I limit them to 15 minutes, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Any of the YouTube clips I'm not going to play, but you have access to these slideshows, so you can have a look at the links yourself. So first of all, let's look at the different types of harp that we come across in traditional Irish music, and we're talking about the Irish harp here as opposed to the orchestral harp, which is a much bigger instrument with pedals and a wider range of notes and so on. The wire string harp, this was the original harp, I suppose. You don't get an idea of the scale there, but it's quite small. It would fit on your, like, you can just plunk it on your knee and play it quite comfortably like that. Few of the features about it. So it was a wire string instrument. The strings were made of brass, so that gave it like a bell-like sound. It had a willow sound box. That means that the wood was from a willow tree for the sound box. Now, if I can show you, the sound box is this part here. That's the sound box. And note that it's square as well. That comes, it's kind of square, I guess. It's flat anyway, which becomes relevant later. It was held on the knee, leaning against the left shoulder. The bass strings were played with the right hand and the treble with the left hand. Those of you who are piano players know that's the other way around on the piano. And it would have been played by plucking the strings with your fingernails, long fingernails, like classical guitar players, if any of you play guitar. There would have been plenty of ornamentation, but not much harmony, and it was tuned to the Mixolydian mode and later the Ionian mode in G. I don't really want to get too much into modes here, guys. It can be quite, it's too big a topic to get into in such a short video tutorial. The Ionian mode, though, for example, is just a fancy way of saying the major key. The Ionian mode and the major scale are the exact same thing. And it had a good range of dynamics. So you can play loud, you can play soft, which was great. Okay, moving along. There's a demonstration of this here, guys. Just because there's so much content to cover here in a very short space of time, I'm not going to play it, but you do kind of see the size of it. It wasn't a particularly big instrument, which made it, I suppose, quite portable as well. Okay, moving along. There is a little video here, guys, that I've put in there more just for your own interest and for enjoyment. Just a nice little story about a harp known as the Brian Boru harp, or the Trinity College harp, which is otherwise known as. This was a harp that was said, the myth about it was the harp played by Brian Boru the night before he died in the Battle of Clontarf. That was 1,000 years ago. We've since dated it to like the 1400s or 1500s. That we've kind of a broad range there. But it definitely wasn't ever used by Brian Boru. It doesn't. The dates don't stack up. It's a beautiful instrument, a beautiful ornate instrument. So I would kind of, if you have the time, just take a couple of minutes to look at this. It's the harp that became the Irish emblem that you would see on the coins and on our initial flag, the original Irish flag. And you see it on government buildings, you see it on Ryanair, you see it on Guinness, you see it on Leinster Rugby, I believe, and so on. I'm not going to get into this now, guys. I'm just going to keep moving along. Okay, after that, the next development in the harp and the instrument itself was with the development of the gut string harp. And here's a picture of the gut string harp. This you would have to stand up. You wouldn't put this on your knee. It's too big for that. You'll see the gauge. You'll see the size of it when you watch the video later. Just noticeable. Obviously, the height is different. I know you can't tell it from there. The soundboard, this part here, was curved at the back as opposed to flat at the back in the wire strung harp. There's the different parts of it there. Just take note as well of these keys here along the neck. These keys allow the strings of the harp to be raised or lowered by one semitone, adjust the pitch by one semitone. So a couple of key points about the gut string harp. The first modern Irish model of it was created by John Egan in the 1820s. It has 34 strings. It has a mellow tone, so a warmer tone essentially than the wire string harp. So remember, the wire string harp had brass strings, would have given that kind of a brighter, harsher sound than the mellow sound of the gut string harp. The sound box was round, which we saw that. Now, an important development here, it was played and still is played with the fleshy part of your fingertips, as opposed to just the nails, which we saw with the wire strung harp. And then each string can be raised a semitone using the brass levers on the neck, which we looked at earlier on. There is again a demonstration of it there. You get a greater sense of the size of it there. So yeah, as you can see, it was bigger. I'm not going to play this tutorial just for time, guys. We don't have enough time for the tutorial, but please do play it yourself, and I will have played it for you in class, of course, as well. So, the harping society, again, the topic here is the harping tradition in Ireland, as opposed to just how the harp is played and what it looks like and the technique and the different types of harps and so on. It's not just about that and harpers and repertoire and so on. It's what was the influence of the harp in society? How is it like, what is the tradition of the harp? So up to the 14th century, harpers were associated more with the aristocracy. Okay, these would be wealthy landowners, for example. They would have played music, accompanied the bards' poetries and songs, chanted their benefactors' praises. Benefactors are their bosses, the people who would have kind of paid them, essentially. So just playing music dedicated to how great their benefactors were. And they would have performed at family ceremonies, I guess, just like baptisms, funerals, weddings, you name it. And in exchange for this, harpers would have been given privilege such as rent-free land. From the 14th, so this is great, of course, rent-free land just for playing the harp. But importantly now, from the 14th century onwards, there were strict laws discouraging the landed English gentry from adopting Irish culture. This had a really kind of a devastating impact on the harp, and the suppression of Irish culture through English law really, I mean, almost forced the harp into extinction, which we'll just talk about in a minute or two. Okay. Interestingly, quite a lot of famous harpers. You will hear a lot of famous blind harpers. It was common for blind people to take harping lessons to earn a living as entertainers. Two of the most famous ones were Rory Dáil O'Cahan. Dáil is actually the Irish for blind. And he would have composed Tor Dum de Love and Turlough O'Carolan. Now, that is officially his name, that is the correct name, but usually we drop the O in Turlough O'Carolan's name. So you might see there, he composed Carolan's Concerto. Why is the O not there? Has Mr. Mullen made a mistake again? No, it's known as Carolan's Concerto, and quite often when we talk about O'Carolan, we just call him Carolan. His planksties were composed in honour of a person or a family. So a planksty is a piece of music written to honour a person. So let's say I employed Carolan to write a piece of music for me, and he might write a piece of music just to say how great I am and it's all about me. He might call that Planksty Mullen, for example. You will hear that, you will come across those references or those type of songs throughout the harping tradition. Then toward the end of the 18th century, like we said, at this point we've been a couple of hundred years of suppression of the harp and all Irish tradition by England, basically. And there were several festivals took place organised by people attempting to revive the harping tradition. So there would have been several at Granard in County Longford, but the main one was the Belfast Harp Festival of 1792, which if you did junior cert music you might remember learning about. So the Belfast Harp Festival of 1792, it was organised by not just these two people. I've made reference to Dr. James MacDonald and Henry Joy McCracken. A lot of these would have been members of the United Irishmen. If you do leave insert history, I'm sure you've come across the United Irishmen, just an organisation completely set up to gain independence for Ireland, for home rule for Ireland and so on. I don't claim to be a historian or a history teacher at all there, so I'm not going to pretend I know an awful lot about them, but that's the idea behind them. The hope of this festival was to revive the ancient music and poetry of Ireland and preserve the Gaelic harp tradition for posterity. So essentially this means that they were worried that harp, if we didn't make a record of these pieces of music that were played on the harp, they could die out. So the idea here was to literally write down these pieces. And there were 10 participants. You can see the names there. I'm not going to go through them. I'm just going to mention a couple of interesting things. The first four guys, the last six from Dan Black downwards, all the way down, and I don't know why I didn't write this in beside Rose Mooney, Arthur O'Neill, Patrick Quinn. They were all blind. So only the first four had full sight, and the remaining six were all blind. The youngest was William Carr, and the oldest was 96, who was the only player who played using the old fingernail style as opposed to playing with the fleshy part of your fingertips. We had a key part of this was the role of Edward Bunting at the festival. So Edward Bunting was a collector of Irish music. I just want to briefly mention here that Edward Bunting, he could come up as a topic himself in your essay. So this information is important here, as could the Belfast Harp Festival. It could come up as a topic to be discussed in an essay on its own. So just keep that in mind. So he was born in 1773, died in 1843. He was employed to literally write down the tunes that he heard at the Belfast Harp Festival so that there would be a written record, a written account of these pieces going forward. He made quite a few mistakes. This would have been because he was literally writing these or notating these pieces as he was hearing them. So he might have just sketched the outline of the songs as he would be listening, and come back to them later on. And there's a few clear inaccuracies and mistakes in them. So for example, he would have written them. He was writing songs in keys that couldn't have been played on the harp. He was writing in accidentals. Now I don't mean accidentally writing. I mean accidentals as in sharp signs, natural signs, flat signs that couldn't be played on the harp. He did, however, collect 40 tunes, including Sheep Yog Seymour, The Fairy Queen, Evelyn Aroon, and Lord Mayo. Just one thing, I couldn't figure out how to put the fada sign on this, so there should be a fada over the I there, and over the U there. So just we don't want to be too harsh on Bunting as well, because like actually what he did at the festival was hugely important to the preservation of the harp as an instrument. And a lot of this information, guys, that I'm getting would have been taken from the Higgins and Higgins book that I use in class as well. So this is not all my research. Okay, so O'Carolan, as we mentioned earlier on, just to briefly talk about him. And again, Turlough O'Carolan, he could come up as an essay topic in his own right as well. There's loads about him. So born in 1670, died in 1738. The O is not often dropped, it's usually dropped. He moved from Meath to Roscommon as a child. His father's employers were the MacDermot Rose, and they took care of his education. In fact, the MacDermot Rose were his patron all the way through his life. He was blinded by smallpox at 18 and learned how to play the harp at 21, becoming a travelling harper. So he was, interestingly for the time, he was accepted by and was employed by both Protestants and Catholics. For example, the Irwin family, a Protestant family, employed him, as did the Plunkett family employed him to write songs for them, and this was unusual at the time, but he wrote planksties for them. I mentioned planksties earlier on, pieces of music played to honour or in tribute of a person or a family. And we have over 2 of his compositions revived, saved today, which is great. And again, he's largely associated with the planksty, a type of harp tune in honour of a person. For example, planksty Irwin and planksty O'Rourke. His style, very much influenced by the old tradition of harp playing. He was also influenced by Irish traditional songs and dances, and also the contemporary music of the time, which we now call Baroque music, and composers such as Corelli and Vivaldi would have had a big influence on his playing, as would Gemignani, just the popular Baroque players of the time. There we go. His legacy, a lot of his pieces have been arranged for classical instruments and orchestra. His music was played at the Belfast Harp Festival, which, to bear in mind, this happened over 50 years after he died, so he was quite well known at the time as well. Several poets have set their poems to his music. For example, Robert Burns, a very famous Scottish poet, and I believe is quite a I think he's quite an important figure in Scottish history. And Thomas Moore, an Irish poet. Sean O'Riordan and Ceoltóirí Coolan, who are an Irish cultural organisation, and Sean O'Riordan, who is an Irish composer, tried very hard in the 1960s to revive an interest in Carolan. And Gerald Barry, the composer, who, depending on what year you're doing your Leaving Cert, you will know all about. He used Sheep Yog Seymour as the basis for the first part of his piano concerto, number 1 in the year 1992. So guys, that brings to the end of it, guys. We're just about to run out of time here on this. I'm going to leave all these links up. You'll be able to download the presentation, so you can watch all these YouTube videos in your own time. Okay, thanks guys. Any questions, get in touch.